we just lost, the budget separation slide, was the one that we used to get started, because it's a safe place to get started. Any CFO, any CEO will understand that conflict. Here we are back again. But once you have started with these discussions about how to improve, you are actually on a beyond budgeting journey. This is a kind of safe backdoor into those bigger discussions about, say, for instance, on targets. What really inspires and motivates the knowledge worker? How can we set targets that are more VUCA-robust? When it comes to forecasting, how can we take out the politics and have an unbiased, simple process? We don't need a million details. This is forecasting, it's not accounting. And last but not least, how can we design a more intelligent and effective way of managing cost than what James or McKinsey could offer us? And I don't have time to go in detail on that last point about resource allocation, but just one quick example from Equinor. We do not have an annual investment budget where we sit in the autumn the year before and decide everything, exactly how much we will invest, split exactly on these projects, and then we hand out the money to these projects. It's too early. So instead, we have a concept which is based on the principle that the bank is always open. So the business can always forward a project at any time. How high up they need to go is regulated by a mandate structure to make sure it's not all ending up at the corporate level. And whether you get a yes or no depends on two simple things. How good is your project against the criteria we have, financial, non-financial? And second, can we afford it as things look today? So very simple organic process, and this is our version of continuous delivery. Not continuous delivery of software development, but of decisions and financial resources. And the last important thing here is, how can we do all of this more event-driven and less calendar-driven? And by separating, we can run these things on different rhythms, which is more suited to the purpose of each one. And the rhythm of targets will typically be less frequent than forecasting, which is more frequent, and resource allocation is something you do all the time. All right, let's move to Equinor and our model, which is called ambition to action. And ambition to action has three purposes. It's about translating strategy, and we also just integrated risk management into this. Secondly, it's about securing agility, room to act and perform. And it's also about activating our values and leadership principles. And I'll give you an example in a minute. It all starts with translating strategy into what we call strategic objectives. So what does success look like on a medium-term time horizon? We are more on words here than on numbers. And we encourage the organization to use a simple, plain, straightforward language here. You shouldn't invite the organization to play bullshit bingo with your strategic objectives. So there are actually some words I recommend the organization to avoid. At least they don't work for me anymore. Excellence doesn't move me anywhere. World class, I'm getting tired of that as well. I'd rather say, let's beat this shit out of the competition. That's what people understand. Then it's time for risk. So what kind of risks are there of not achieving these objectives? Other risks in our business? Having done that, it's time for actions. Which actions do we need to move towards those objectives? And to mitigate those risks, and very often it's one and the same thing. So that's why it's one process and one common database. Then we are trying to understand consequences of actions to forecasting. We do dynamic forecasting, so we update our forecast when stuff happens, not on a regular cycle, but when stuff happens. So I can believe me, we are doing a lot of forecast updates these days, more frequent than what we typically would do. Then it's time for measurement, measuring that we are moving towards these strategic objectives. The only problem with measurement is that measurement alone moves nothing. Nothing happens just because we measure. You don't lose weight simply by weighing yourself. And I know a bit about that as well, because I've tried, and that was not a big success. Then my wife, by the way, she told me that, Bjarte, maybe you didn't stand there long enough. Well, that would be some kind of action. But the point is that nothing happens before we do something. That is why it's called ambition to action. Please note that we have called this stage we don't talk about KPIs, we talk about indicators. That is to remind ourselves that the I in KPI stands for indicator. They are indicating that we are moving towards those objectives, but they are not necessarily telling the full truth. They are not called KPTs, key performance truth. They are called key performance indicators, and we should never forget. So you can't base a management model on KPI or indications alone. Then it's time for what does this mean for you and me and the teams we are in. And here's an example of activating important words or important principles in our management model, because we have a concept where we say that how you deliver is as important as what you deliver. And with how we deliver, we talk about the values in the company. And the weighting between the two and all consequences for your career and for your pay is 50-50. I recall when this was introduced, somebody said that this was a brave decision because not too many companies are doing this. There are some. I wouldn't call it a brave decision. I would call it an obvious decision, because how can we say that we want to be a values-based organization if everything on values is completely absent in our performance process? What you see here is an integrated performance process running quite seamlessly from strategy via risk, via finance into HR. And we've been working very closely together to make this coherent, consistent, integrated, all these four functions together. It's very important, especially finance, HR are key partners on a beyond budgeting journey. This stuff is too important to leave to finance people. I hope I didn't offend anyone with that one, but that's the way it is. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you an example of an ambition to action. This is one from, it's a screenshot from the one we have on corporate level. So forget the content here, but it is a bit general because we are on a corporate level. They all start with an ambition statement, and for us it's shaping the future of energy. And you recognize the first 4 steps from the previous process, and then the HR process follows on. And the 5 perspectives we have here behind the red arrows, that is inspired by the so-called balanced scorecard thinking, which I actually have a little bit ambivalent view on. Balanced scorecards, because used in the wrong way, or they are often used to reinforce traditional management of micromanagement and centralized command and control. If you have a balanced scorecard, it's much easier to micromanage than if you only have a financial budget to do it through. So we are trying to do this in a different way, but there is some inspiration here. Yes, we want to create value, which is represented down there. That will, at the bottom, that will never happen unless we do well against customers and markets. That will never happen unless we do well on internal operations. That will never happen unless we do well on people and organization. And in our case, safety, security, sustainability. Safety for us in our business is extremely important. If we then move to the next one, then today we have around 600 of these in the organization, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide because here there are 2 other areas where we try to be different. This represents more or less the organizational structure in the company, and you might say that, well, that is a deep and very hierarchical structure or organization, but this slide, or that structure, do not tell the full story. It says nothing about the low power distance in the organization. It says nothing about all the collaboration taking place across here. But 2 messages here. First, when it comes to alignment, the easy way to create alignment, because we have a strategy that we shall implement, is top-down cascading. That we simply sit at corporate and instruct all the way down. This is the content of your ambition to action, words, and especially numbers. And we finance people, or some of us, or some finance people, tend to like that top-down cascading, because afterwards they can add up all the local numbers and it matches the corporate number down to the last decimal. And then they can sleep well at night, right? We will deliver because it all hangs together down to the last decimal. Well, I wish it was that simple. In our culture, at least, that top-down cascading easily destroys everything related to involvement, commitment, motivation. That easily walks out the door if this is seen as just another command and control mechanism. So that alignment doesn't work. But we still need alignment, but we have a better way of achieving it. We call it translation. And that means that when a unit out there shall make their own ambition to action, they would look around, one level up, maybe further up, maybe all the way to corporate, left and right if they have business relations horizontally. And then the team would have a deep and good discussion. What does our ambition to action need to look like to support those that we have a relationship to, when it comes to ambition level and when it comes to direction? And if that translation should go wrong, of course the level above should do what they are paid for, but that is not a big problem. And the reason is transparency, because all of these ambition to actions are open, accessible for all employees. There should be no place to hide with a stupid ambition to action. So we are using transparency here as a control mechanism, but also just as much as a learning mechanism. We want people to surf around and learn and be inspired about what others are doing. It's not mandatory to have an ambition to action. If we said it's mandatory, it's easily perceived as, again, the corporate control mechanism. So teams decide for themselves if they want to use this or not. We encourage them, but we do not impose this. When it comes to rhythm, we do not have annual versions of ambition to action. Instead, we are trying to run this much more continuously. So these teams can, in principle, change whatever they want on their own ambition to action at any time. Any content, words, numbers, including targets, if these targets have lost their meaning, impossible to achieve or become a piece of cake. But it's not an anarchy. We have a very simple control mechanism beyond transparency. If a unit wants to make a big change, it still needs to have a talk with the level above. There's no signs, there's no signatures, there's no stamps, but you need an approval from the level above. If it's a small change, you just inform at a suitable time. And big and small, make sure that you inform others which might be affected by your changes. So that's the coordination part of this. When this was introduced, people said, great, I like that one. But by the way, what's big and what's small? And there was expectations about us defining that on behalf of everybody from corporate. And that's, of course, impossible. So we've delegated it. So it could be that there is somebody out there with a different definition of big and small compared to somebody else. But that's okay, as long as it works both places. I want you to think back to the roundabout self-regulation. We would like this to run as self-regulating as possible. We shall not abdicate from corporate. We shall support when needed, intervene when needed. But the more this can be run by itself, and the more these units perceive ambition to action as something they mainly have in order to help them to manage their own business. If that's in place, then we are where we want to be. Then I'd like to move to the last part of the model, which is called dynamic resource allocation. And why do we need a holistic performance evaluation? Well, there are at least 4 reasons. First of all, fixed targets struggle in a dynamic world. And we know all about that these days. We also need to create comfort around ambitious targets. You know, in most performance processes, there is an inconsistency between the message we give in the beginning, which is set yourself ambitious targets, and the message we give indirectly when it's time to evaluate performance, because then the message is that that was a very stupid thing to do, because it just reduced the chance of hitting that target and getting the goodies that follow. So we need to create kind of comfort and fairness. We need to remember that KPIs are not KPTs, and that we are always wiser in hindsight. And I'm sure that you've seen these wise words by Albert Einstein. So we move on. So here is what we do at Equinor. And it's a bit busy slide, but I'll take you through it. So holistic performance evaluation for us is 2 things. It's first of all the 50-50 between what we deliver as defined by ambition to action and how we deliver as defined by our values. The other part of holistic means that when we shall evaluate what we have delivered in business terms, then that cannot be an exercise of adding up the number of red and green indicators and then conclude. If we are dumbing down performance evaluation to something like that, then our managers would need 2 competences or qualifications only to do that job. They have to be able to count, and they can't be colorblind. And I think we should have somewhat higher expectations towards our managers here. I wouldn't pass that test, by the way, because I can count, but I'm halfway colorblind. We might start with counting, but then we need to take off the measurement glasses and look at what measurement did not pick up. I see that your indicator is green, but have we really moved towards those strategic objectives? How ambitious were those targets? Should we punish somebody who stretched and didn't make it, and do the opposite with somebody who lowballed and gamed and kind of made it? Has there been significant changes in assumptions that we should take into account? And of course, the coronavirus is a good example, but it could also be smaller stuff that should be taken into account. How was risks handled, and what's the sustainability of what has been delivered? And it's only when we have been through these questions that we can have a view on performance. And these questions, which can be applied in both dimensions, and the evaluation coming out of it, many years ago, it ended up in a rating on a 1 to 5 scale in both dimensions. Nobody liked that, including myself, so we kicked that out. So today there's a much more assessment-based link to what has always been the purposes of this process. Number one is development, the most important one, learning and development. Second one, rewards. There is a link to merit pay, and also a link to individual bonus for those on individual bonus. Again, I'm not a big fan, but it does help to have this holistic evaluation. And when it comes to the expression pay for performance, we are actually trying to weaken that link when it comes to pay, especially merit pay. It should be driven by a lot of other things beyond performance. It's about market, it's about where you are in your career, and a lot of other stuff. All right, that takes me to my second last slide, which is a little commercial. This is the book I mentioned, which is out in the second edition, and it is the very long version of what I've been talking about here. And I have to say that what our CEO said about this book is something that made me really proud when he shared those words. And my last slide here is my coordinates. Should you take that one?
Actually, there was none, Bjarte.
Okay. I've forgotten that one. All right. Yeah, no, that's my mistake. But,
I'll do the needed to circulate your contact info when I share the deck, the videos, and so people will have direct access to you if needed. Is that okay?
Yeah, very good. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I only tweet about this stuff. There's no cats and dogs and grandchildren, I promise. I have some articles out on LinkedIn if you want to follow me there. I just wrote on a topic which I'm quite fascinated about. I didn't have time to talk about it. It's about target setting. It's called hitting the target but missing the point.
There's some questions, and not so much for you to answer now, but more about artifacts that you can offer, such as, do you have any performance management templates? I'm sure that I've missed a few comments before. So I guess maybe just I'm going to answer this question for you with a wide brushstroke. Access to you would be available by having your profile and maybe your email and your Twitter. So people want to ask this directly, they certainly can. Although this is, I mean, I don't answer for you, of course, but yeah. So we'll make a direct action. Okay,
but I guess we have a few minutes if there are any specific questions we take live now, or is that difficult?
So yeah, we have we have 2 minutes left, and we have 100, almost 100 people in the queue. We can, so if someone, so people asking for templates. So I have two, three questions collected from prior exchange. People were asking about this stuff, directing it to you, specifically with regards to product development. And you may not necessarily have the entire dynamics picture, but here's the question. So you mentioned about bonuses and giving, bonuses based on individual performances. You talked about that. That's obviously very toxic and very counterproductive. People someone asked about, we have the need to sponsor a long-living cross-functional team on an ongoing basis so they can develop our product continuously and consistently without onboarding, offboarding, changing individuals, and just, you know, churning resources. How does it work with existing budgeting, as far as you know? Maybe you've been around those cases.
Well, there are. Again, I didn't have time to go into detail about how we do it on beyond the investment projects. But I mean, one mechanism we have on the menu is what we call a burn rate guiding, so that you simply, I mean, you provide a burn rate guiding, operate at an activity level that in money kind of means this until something else is decided. There's no details in it. There's no travel budget, no nothing, and it can be changed at any time. So it's more a strategic decision about activity level, which must be separated from the more operational, ongoing decisions about how to spend your money. So that's one alternative.
I think it's very consistent with how we recommend this in large-scale Scrum and in basic Scrum. So that's
right.
Interesting. Yeah. One shout out, people have been thanking you left and right. I see some familiar names. In fact, some folks from the Scrum Alliance, you know, also here thanking you for this. So I appreciate you giving this talk. So shall we wrap at this point? And so I'll go ahead and wrap this, folks. Thank you all for joining. It has been a very interesting conversation again with Bjarte, although I've heard him speak so many times. Every time it's just refreshing and re-evangelizing. Everything that we have done today will be available online. I will share the deck. Unfortunately, I dropped myself from the call because of my bandwidth, but I started re-recording immediately thereafter. So there will be actually 2 recordings, almost like half and half. They will be all made available to those that could make it or want to replay. And we're just going to leave it at that. Keep joining our events and bring your friends and colleagues to Large Scale Scrum meetup. Hopefully we can entertain you with a few other things in the nearby future. Okay, and Bjarte, my personal thanks to you. This has been of tremendous value to all of us. Okay.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, go ahead. Say something.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And I mean, when it comes to you guys, I mean, you get this stuff, you understand it. When I'm talking to finance people and many executives, managers, my simple message is that this stuff is going to happen. It will happen. Whether it will be called beyond budgeting or business agility, I couldn't care less, but it will happen. And I'm convinced that when we in 15, 20 years time look back at what was mainstream management in 2020, then we're going to smile a bit or even have a laugh, just like we today smile about the days before the internet, right? It isn't that long ago, right? And as organizations, I mean, you can choose to be early movers on this journey and get competitive advantage, or you can choose to be dragged into this as one of the last ones. I think that is a very simple choice. Thank you.
Yep, you can be either a leader or a lagger, or, you know, and then be trying to catch up and play the catch up. So,
absolutely.
Want to take your medication, you know, at high dosage, or do you want to drink your vitamins throughout your life and just stay healthy? It's those analogies, right, come to mind. All right, well, we're gonna wrap, so I'm gonna finish recording. I'm gonna stop the video. This is gonna start recording to the cloud, and I like giving those artifacts back to the community as soon as I can. So maybe sometime later today. All right. Cheers to everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
How to figure out how to close it.